Hello and welcome back to UMA 301. In this episode we are going to apply some DNA to our character and actually get some of those modifications working, just like a normal UMA. Now from the last episode I've just made one small change, and that is to the textures, just to get rid of that horrible shiny effect we were having. I've done a dirty trick, which is if you look in the overlay, I've simply replaced this specular gloss map with something random and grey, which I found just by hitting the selector. I've picked the female body specular or roughness, there we are, and that's sorted things out. Obviously you need to play around with these things. I'm not going to go through it. It's pretty straightforward when you get into it. Okay, so let's start building some DNA for our character. As you can see, if we look at him now, the DNA is empty, so we'll fix that. So first thing we'll do, because we've already created quite a few files here, I'm just going to create a subfolder to make things a little bit tidier. So let's create another folder here, and we'll call this DNA, and this is where we're going to put all of our new assets. So to begin with, to do normal DNA, we need to create an UMA, and the first thing we need is a dynamic DNA converter. So I'm going to create one of those, and here we are. It's popped that into that DNA folder. I'm going to rename this, so we'll call this fuse male DNA converter. Right, so this is the thing that actually holds all of these links between sliders and actual movements of the bones. For it to work, we have to create a DNA listing. So that is a list of all of the names of the sliders that we're going to use. Now what we need to do is make sure this dynamic DNA window is dropped down, and we can hit here, create a dynamic DNA asset. So if I hit that, it will ask me where. I'm going to put it in my project folder, and here we are, fuse male race DNA, and I'll pop that in there. Okay, so it's created here with this ridiculously long name, so let's just change this. We'll have this as the fuse male DNA asset. Okay, so these are the two things that are going to do the work for us. What you'll see here is we have our male DNA asset, and if we look in the converter, because we created it from here, it has appeared in this list. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this DNA asset, and we're going to type in some sliders that we want. Let's start with an overall height. Okay, overall height, and I'm going to add that as a DNA name. What I'm doing here, I'm actually using two words, and when we look at our DNA, the first word is used as a grouping. So if I have overall height, overall muscle, overall ugliness, whatever I want to choose, they will all appear as height, muscle, ugliness in a subsection called overall. So it's quite handy, this. You'll see how this works once we actually build it. So that's probably one of the simplest ones we can create. Let's have a look at our the ones we messed around with. So we did a nose tip, didn't we? So I'm going to say nose tip length. Okay, we'll create that one. Let's have nose tip width. Okay, that's good. And we also put some adjust bones on these arms, didn't we? So let's have overall muscle. Okay, so I've created 4 different DNA sliders there. The 5th one that I want will be our morph that we've had on the ears. However, a morph must be in a separate set of DNA and converters, so morph adjustments must be something different, or must be defined somewhere else. So we'll have a look at that later on, but for now these are our bone adjustments. If I flick back to the DNA converter, you'll see that those names have been carried over automatically. So we can now go about actually defining in this area here what these things do. Now, one slightly strange thing, we can't actually do that when we're not running. We have to be use a special script in a special scene in order to modify these. So we'll head over there. If you've got a scene you're working on, let's just save that, and I'm going to head over into UMA, examples, extension examples, the dynamic character system, and have a look in the scenes. Now there's a few scenes in here, but what we're interested in is this DCS tool, the converter behavior. Okay, let's open that scene, and what we'll get is a list of, well, a group of people. If we press start, what this will do, it'll allow us to look at a race. We can change the race, or change that for a human male, and we can actually modify the DNA of that particular race here. If we look at this dynamic DNA converter over here, this is the thing that does the magic. We can say in here our target DNA, let's have a look at the human male DNA, and this shows everything that's actually listed in that DNA. We can fiddle with the human male DNA right here. Okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that because we don't want to mess with him, we want to mess with ours. So if I change the race and go down to, there's our fused male. Okay, and you can see we've switched to our fused male, ready to go. If I go to this target UMA converter and I drop it down, our fused male converter does not appear, and that's because we haven't actually connected it to our race yet. So let's do that. So we can close our UMA folder now, and what we need to mess around with here is our fused male race data. And in here you may have noticed earlier this DNA converter list, which is empty. Well, I'm going to drag my newly created male converter into there. Okay, so we now have one converter, and this is going to be the one that deals with our bone movements. Okay, so if we run again and change our race to fused male, and if we hit our dynamic DNA converter customizer and pull this drop down, there we are, we can now see our DNA converter is available to play with. So I'm going to select that, and that brings up a blue version of what we were looking at before. This time we can actually define things while this scene is running. So let's not mess about, let's just collapse some things down and make sure we can see what we want to see. So the first thing we created was our overall height, wasn't it? So let's have a little look. We created overall height. So if we go back to this converter behavior, let's actually add that. I don't need to mess with the names up here, so I'm going to collapse this dynamic DNA. Where I'm interested in messing around with is this skeleton modifiers panel. So I'm going to open this up, and down here we can choose which bone we want to mess around with and what we want to do with it. So I'm going to pick that global bone that we created in Blender. This is the very root bone of the whole thing. So I'm going to connect with that, and I want to modify its scale. Okay, when I say add, that creates a new modifier. So you can see here we've got global scale, and if I open that up, this is how we can adjust what's changed there. So we've chosen our global bone, we're going to scale it. You can see here in this this box down here, this might be collapsed for you when you first come to it, but if we drop it down, we can choose the X, Y and Z value. We can choose a minimum and maximum that we're going to put in there, and we can also add modifiers. So the easiest way to use this is to actually have a look and see what I do here. So if you imagine the scale of that global bone at the moment is 1, I'm going to add a modifier here. So I'm going to change this to add DNA. Okay, and I'm going to pick from this new drop down that's appeared, I'm going to pick overall height. So what this is going to do, this is going to add the value of my overall height slider to the scale of my X value of the global bone. So let's see that work. If we're in this scene, we can actually pick the body DNA, and I should be able to slide the overall height, and you can see that is working. That's moving the X value of my global bone. Now obviously I want that in all of them, so I'm going to move into here and I'm going to add that modifier again. So add DNA, add the overall height, and I'm going to do the same in the Z. So add DNA, overall height. So let's see what happens there. Overall height, the camera actually moves with my character. Now I might not be too happy with that size range, and if you're wondering how that size range is being derived from, you've got to do a little bit of maths here. So if you think, what have I got? I've got a scale of 1. If I add my DNA, the slider actually goes from minus 0.5 to plus 0.5. So this is a scale of 1.5. This is a scale of 0.5. You can limit that by doing a number of things. So I can say, for example, I could say the minimum wants to be 0.8 and the maximum wants to be 1.2. So these are clamps on that value. If you watch, I can no longer, yes I can, if you look, that's only happening in the X. Can you see how it's distorting? Let me quickly do those values over here. 0.8 and 1.2, so that's in all axes. So 0.8 and 1.2, there we go. Now when I try that, I can't get anywhere near the range that I had before. However, because it's a clamp, look what's happening with my slider. It reaches that maximum and then the rest of the slider's dead. So although it's a good way to limit the actual controls, it does mean you lose some resolution in this slider, so it's not necessarily the best way to go about limiting your character. So I'm going to put these back to where they were. I'm not actually going to use hard limits. I'm going to use a different method to limit the height of my character. Again, you can use a mix of them if you want. It's completely up to you, but I'm going to use a multiplier instead. So what I'm going to do is add another modifier on top of what we have now. So I said at the highest this is 1.5, at the lowest it's 0.5. I can say add, and I can say multiply by, let's say 0.5 here. Okay, let's see what that does. So that takes the result from this slider and then multiplies it by 0.5. So if you have a look again, it is limiting it. You can see I'm getting that distortion, but this time it's over the full length of the slider. So let me try that once more. Add, multiply 0.5 and do the same in the Z. Add, multiply the result by 0.5. What I should get, let's have a look. You can see I've reduced that by half. So I've halved that limit, but it works across the full length of the slider. Yep. So it's a little bit unusual to get your head round. This is a stack of things that are going to happen. Yeah. So we're adding that value on from the slider with then halving its effect, if you like. Whereas these values here actually just clamp and stop the effect going too far. All right. So you can have some fun with that. This change is happening live. This hasn't actually modified my converter behavior yet. So if I stop, I'm going to lose all of this info, which I don't want. So I'm going to head down to the bottom and hit save. We get a warning. This is going to overwrite what's in the current converter. That's what we want. And there we go. That is now a permanent fixture. Okay. So let's do another one. Let's do something else. So that's the global scale. Nice and easy. Let's choose another bone. Let's have our nose tip, and we'll scale again, and we're going to add that one. You can see that gets added to our list. So let's open up the nose tip, and this one we're going to find, let's have a look at the value for Y. I'm going to add a DNA modifier, and I'm going to add my nose tip width to the Y. Let's just see what this does. Let's pick face DNA, and you can see nose tip width, and you can see my nose width being modified. Okay, again, if I want the effect to be more pronounced, I can add a multiplier, and let's multiply my effect by 2. Again, you can see I get a much more pronounced effect, and you can again use your clamps. But the great thing with this modifier is I can also pick X. I can add some DNA, but this time I'm going to pick the nose tip length. And again, let's put a multiplier on there just to increase the effect to 2. Okay. So what we should see here now, I can now make his nose longer or shorter. And I can make, let's just get a better look at that, make his nose longer or shorter, and I can make it wider and thinner. So basically that is how we go about creating these wonderful bone morphs in our UMAs. And again, if I save that, we'll make that permanent. Okay, one last thing, I want to do something a little bit more complex just to show you how we can do something a bit cleverer. So if we go into the body DNA, this overall muscle I want to have a look at. So we're actually going to, with the same slider, we're going to modify 4 things. Okay, so first of all, let's choose our first bone, and we will modify, let's see, we had this right arm adjust. Okay, we'll do that one first. So right arm adjust, that's over here, and we'll fiddle with the scale for that. So let's let's go ahead and add that to our list. Collapse the other ones, and we want to open up our right arm adjust. Lovely. And one of these is the length, which I believe is X. Let's just fiddle with this and try it. Let's add the overall muscle will have affecting this. So let's see what the X value does. And you can see that's that along the length of the arm. So this is the one I don't want to touch. We don't like that one. So let's hit the X and remove that modifier. So Y and Z are the ones that need the modifier on. So let's add DNA, and let's add our overall muscle. Okay, and do the same to the Z value. Add DNA, add overall muscle, and what we should see here is we can adjust the bulk of our character. Now for me that looks a little bit ridiculous. What you can also see, I don't particularly like the way the mesh works around these bones. That's nothing to do with them, but that's to do with our mapping that came from Mixamo. We just took it straight out of the box, but you might want to go back and fiddle with that mapping, but that's down to your artistic skills. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to just adjust the multiplier on that. I don't want it to have quite such a profound effect, so maybe half of that effect. So again, in here for my Y, I'm going to add a multiplier, and I'm going to multiply that by 0.5, and the same in the Z. Let's add a multiplier and by 0.5. So what we should have now is that arm, it increases and decreases in bulk, but by half the amount. That's absolutely great. Okay, so right arm done. Let's look for the left arm. So left arm adjust, which we created, that one. Scale again, let's add that, and let's add our modifiers. So we'll add the overall muscle and multiply that by 0.5. Do the same to the Z, add DNA from overall muscle and add our multiplier of 0.5. Okay, so now both arms should do the same thing. Let's just spin round, fiddle with the muscle, and there we go, we've got muscle control. One other thing I want to do, which is what your current vanilla UMAs do, is as you add muscle, the shoulders actually move further apart. So let's do that as well. So again, we need another modifier here, so we're going to choose, let's choose the left shoulder here, and let's add that modifier. So the left shoulder, again, bit of trial and error here. I reckon, is it the X we want to move? I've done something wrong here. Can you see how I'm scaling the left shoulder? I don't want to do that. I want to choose that left shoulder, and I instead want to change it to position. So you can have DNA modify rotation, position, or scale. It's up to you. I'm going to say position, and then I'm going to add that one. Okay, so you can see left shoulder position. Okay, so I believe it's X that I want. It's got a minimum and a maximum of 0.1, which on our skeleton is huge. let's add our DNA slider and see what happens. So let's add the DNA to that and go of overall muscle, and straight away you can see that's not the right axis. I don't want to be on that one, so let's remove that one. And Z, try Z, add the DNA slider, overall muscle. That's the one I'm after. Or is it? No, it's not. It's always the last one, isn't it? That's going front to back as I actually use it. So let's remove that. Finally, it must be this one. So it's the Y value, and I'm going to link that up, and you can see overall muscle works. That's the way I want it. However, it's back to front, so as I slide this way I want the shoulder to be further out, and also the scale of it's too big. So first thing I'm going to do is instead of add DNA, I'm going to subtract it, and that should change the direction. Yep, that works great. And I'm going to add a multiplier, and this time I don't want it to be anywhere near as powerful, so let's say 0.2. Yep, and we'll try now. That's 0.2, still massive, isn't it? Let's in fact I think I need to go down to something like 0.05, and let's see what happens there. That's a lot more subtle, but you can see the chest just expanding a little there. I like that. That's the one. So it's the Y value by 0.05. So I'm going to do this with the right shoulder. So let's find the right shoulder. Be down here somewhere. There it is. Right shoulder. And I'm going to say position. Add that one. We know that it's the Y value we want to change. I'm going to add. This time it won't be subtract because the axis is the other way around. It'll be add the muscle slider, and again add my multiplier, just to reduce the effect of that by 0.05. And again, there we go. That's a much nicer effect that we're getting. Obviously I'd maybe, if I'd put adjust bones on for this chest, I'd maybe reduce what was happening here and make him skinnier overall, but you can see how it works. Before I'm finished, I've got to hit save, and that's it. So this scene here is where it all happens, okay? And that was down here in the extension examples. So if we now go back to our original scene, so this is our original scene with our original fuse male character in there. His DNA now works. So let's let's pick him, have a look at his DNA. You can see all the ones we defined. The height works within our limits. The nose, let's see if we can get that working. Yep, the nose works there as we wanted, and also our muscle works just the way our standard UMA does. Okay, that's the magic. That's how you can turn any model into something that little bit special using UMA. One last thing that we haven't touched on, which we'll look at in the next episode, is using that morph data that we have in our ears. Just so you can see that morph data is there. We saw this before, but I can slide that here, and we are going to affect that using DNA in the next episode. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time. And once again, I'd like to say a big thank you to my patrons for making this possible. If you would like to support me, feel free to click that link at the end of the video. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.